Mysterious death of Jan Vitkevich. The shot, more like a dry click, sounded at night. None of the tenants heard it. And in the morning at 9 o'clock, the supervisor knocked on the door of the room. The guests asked him to wake him up at that time, but no one answered. They broke the door and saw a terrible scene. A man with a shot in his temple was on the floor. 1839, St. Petersburg, hotel on Malaya Morskaya Street. People could not believe what happened for a long time. On this day, the deceased was expected to meet with people at the highest level. He was going to get rewards and the next assignment. Mysterious death of Jan Vitkevich. He was a soldier in the Orsk fortress at the beginning, and later a second lieutenant, an officer. There can be different versions of Vitkevich's death. Still, the great game was not a gentleman's game. It was a war of intelligence services. Chapter 1. Exiled Schoolboy. Jan Vitkevich. Contemporaries gave him a following characteristics: gloomy, humor, attentive to details, secretive, reserved, and courageous. Not boastful, proud, doesn't have an addiction to alcohol. Adventurous and cynical in moderation. But nevertheless, there was a certain fracture in his character. From the nature of a modest nature, he became even more shy of unfortunate circumstances. Even in his childhood, he made a prank, which was called a political crime. Wasily Perovsky. In Poland, at the beginning of the 19th century, there were many secret communities. They gathered together, spoke about the independence of Poland, people's education, self-improvement. Jan Vitkevich was in the organization Black Brothers. He was not even 15 years old when he was arrested for belonging to a secret society and distribution of outrageous letters of the ideas. 1823. First, there was the prison, the waiting for the verdict, and then the schoolboy and the nobleman Vitkevich lost all his fortune and rights. He was shackled and sent to the Kazakh steppes. Vitkevich spent more than 10 years as a soldier, and despite being led by drunken and depraved officers, he managed to not only preserve the purity and nobility of the soul, but he developed his mental abilities. He learned the Eastern languages and got acquainted with the steppe. There was not yet a man who would have known the inner world of Horde so well. He was respected by all Kyrgyz people in general. Wasily Perovsky. Several years of square bashing on the parade ground, daily guard, malnutrition, ban on correspondence. He had a dream of escape through the steppe to India. In general, in the steppe, he was very comfortable. He knew the Quran by heart, the customs, were friends, and who were at war with whom. He spoke fluent Kazakh. He had a lot of friends. His salvation from a soldier's destiny began after a meeting with Alexander Humboldt. In 1829, a German scientist came to Orsk. He accidentally discovered his works. He was surprised, wished to see whom they belonged to. That's how they got acquainted. While escorting Humboldt, Vitkevich opened his intention to move across Central Asia to the British colonies. I had to follow him as a deaf mute because of not knowing any of the Oriental languages. In the steppe, horses were exhibited, but Humboldt persuaded Vitkevich to abandon this attention, but to wait for a better fate with patience. Aloysius Pislak. After the meeting with Humboldt, Vitkevich was granted a job in the ensemble of ensigns, appointed as an interpreter. Since then, there has been constant strife in the steppes, at the request of Dahl, who recorded local songs and fairy tales. He told him the story of Bikay and Maulana. Jan was present at the death of the Kazakh Juliet. He rode the steppe for business, and he saw Maulana dying of smallpox. He was present at her death. After Wasily Perovsky became the head of the province, Vitkevich takes off in his career. It is interesting that the governor's friend Alexander Pushkin contributed to this. While in Orenburg, he met Vitkevich, who fascinated the poet with the knowledge of the steppe epics. Perovsky accepted Pushkin's recommendations and generally treated Vitkevich in a fatherly way. He was Perovsky's adjutant. He himself visited Kazakh auls. He had a position. He was sorting out administrative issues. I completely satisfy my passion for adventure, he wrote to his friend Vladimir Dahl, and he had a lot of adventures. Chapter 2, Episode in the Big Game. The purpose of my departure to the steppe is to get into the state of affairs of the Kyrgyz families, to act on the minds and spirit of the horde, to deliver detailed information, to find out about the influence of Bukharans, Khivans, and Englishmen. Jan Vitkevich. He went to the steppe, he was in Bukhara. Vitkevich writes that he was forced by circumstances, bad weather. Most likely, Perovsky initially sent him to Bukhara. According to rumors, there was an Afghan envoy, a friend of Vitkevich. By that time, Russia and Britain are in a state of hidden war, although officially they are allies. The British are afraid of Russia's arrival to India. India was very important. Without India, England would not have been a great power, when without Turkestan, without Central Asia, Russia still was one of the most powerful powers in the world. At the same time, England intends to make Bukhara and Khiva their allies. The British needed to start a war, maybe among the Khanats with Russia, to draw Russia's forces away from Central Asia and squeeze them out from there, but later to maybe occupy it. Vitkevich does not paint his adventures, does not dramatize them especially, but it was a dangerous task. There were places where the Europeans were threatened with the death penalty. Someone's head was cut off, someone was poisoned. Nevertheless, it was already the third trip to Bukhara. There's little known about others. For the first time, with two faithful Kyrgyz, Vitkevich made a transition to Bukhara in 17 days on horseback, through the snow, through the frozen Sirdarya. He dressed in Kyrgyz clothes, perfectly mastered the customs and language. No one recognized that he was European. Beautiful dark eyes, a black beard, and a swarthy face. Ivan Blarenberg. And this time he was in Oriental clothes, but he did not hide that he was a Russian officer. That's what Bukhara minister liked about him. Vitkevich was always on top. On the edge of death several times. Quote, I almost died fighting off at night from the caravan. Built a fire and Kaisaks from the caravan found me. That's it, no sentimental details. They wanted to poison him. It did not work. They tried to attack unsuccessfully. In the memorandum, he mentioned everyone who helped him. People about whom I diligently intercede. Sultan Murza Galiyev, Kaisak to the family Jigalbai. Bik Batir, with his affection and services, deserves a silver medal. Jan Vitkevich. His report on the trip was classified for a century and a half. In Bukhara, he met an envoy from Kabul and then went with him to Petersburg with a diploma from the Afghan emir to the Tsar. Thus, England lost this round of the big game. The next step is a duel in Kabul. Chapter 3, Mission Unexplained. In St. Petersburg, Vitkevich receives the assignment to escort the Kabul envoy to Afghanistan and conclude an allied treaty with the emir. December 1837, I was in Kabul, but the British representative already operates successfully. Alexander Burns is the most famous English traveler in Afghanistan and Bukhara. Yes, there were English people, but the British tried to keep Afghanistan at that time. They wanted to keep it. They wanted to close the road to Russians to enter the Indian Ocean. On learning of the arrival of the Russian officer, Burns invites him for Christmas. They even liked each other. That did not prevent the British from setting up the head of Kabul against the Russian envoy. Both Burns and Vitkevich tried to drag the emir to their side. The diplomatic duel ended with the victory of Vitkevich. He contributed to the fact that Russian influence won the upper hand on the territory of Afghanistan. The reaction of the British was immediate. They were very unhappy because the Afghan emir always refused to accept the English ambassador, and they believed that this was the beginning of Russian politics to take Afghanistan into its sphere of influence. From London to St. Petersburg, notes of protest were sent. The actions of the envoy complicate the British-Russian relationship and can even lead to war. Negotiations in Kabul are interrupted. Nikolai I had to declare Vitkevich's act as arbitrariness. He was recalled to Petersburg. Metro station, Admiraltelskaya now, and in the beginning of the 19th century, there was a lucrative house in a hotel, Paris. It was a very popular place at that time. He already stopped in this hotel. Last time he lived here for a week, apparently he was working on the report. All the important documents were kept with him. May 8, 1839. In the locked room, the best Russian field agent was found with a head shot through, a strange note on the desk. Without knowing the person whose fate I would occupy in any respect, I find it satisfactory to explain that I am losing my life voluntarily. Any fees I had to pay to the owner of the inn I made on May 7th, 3 in the morning, Vitkevich. Mentions about relatives and friends are not present, simply a list of how to dispose the salary for 2 years to return the debt to the merchant on Nevsky Avenue for a uniform. All the remaining things leave to the officer's valet. Also from a note, all the papers relating to the last trip were burned by me, and therefore the search for them will be in vain. In the fireplace there is a lot of ashes. Vitkevich was killed by a shot in the back of the head when he burned his manuscripts near the stove in a hotel. According to the official version, it was a shot in the temple. According to information, mostly from English sources, in St. Petersburg, he had a cold welcome. He was called an impostor, which was the reason for his suicide. But there are other data. He clearly followed all the instructions received in St. Petersburg. Despite the failed victory in Kabul, he was expected as a hero. He was very well received by the ministry. A report was prepared on his transfer to the Guard and on awarding the order and money. It seemed that he was very pleased and cheerful one more day before his death. Lev Sinyavin, vice director of the Asian department. Friends also remembered that Vitkevich was cheerful, was going to ask for a vacation. What could have happened? According to one version, on that day he met with an acquaintance who called him a traitor to Poland because he served the interests of Russia, and the upset Vitkevich shot himself in the temple. Many researchers saw the English trace in the fatal shot. Although in general there was a gentleman's agreement that intelligence officers do not kill each other. Writer Mikhail Gus suggested that Jan was killed by a British agent who came to him to recruit him. And Vitkevich allegedly offered him a toss to whom he falls. He also shoots. That's why he wrote a suicide note. According to Gus, the agent shot Vitkevich without waiting for the outcome of the lot. Then he burned some papers in the fireplace and took the rest. These papers consisted of his notes, copies of the correspondence of English agents. All information about Afghanistan has been lost, which are especially interesting and useful for us. Lev Sinyavin, vice director of the Asian department. Began to compile a dictionary of the Russian-Turkish dictionary, and this work disappeared. And in a few years, the same dictionary was published in England. Epilogue: Unclosed Case. And more strange things. Ostensibly, Vitkevich shot himself with a silver ball from the sugar bowl. Somehow it was too exotic. And according to the inventory compiled by the bailiff, there were no pistols in the room. Was it a real suicide note? The original was not preserved, only a copy, and not the first one. Who came to him on the eve of death? And did the papers really burn? And was it a suicide? These questions cannot be answered for 2 centuries. Counterintelligence is the most insidious organization in the world. Only one example. 2 decades later, after returning from Kashgaria, Chokan Volekhanov went to St. Petersburg when he finished work on the report, and copies were made from it. A fatal shot at the Hotel Paris became a warning for everyone who came after Vitkevich.